you need to recognise rejection as part of the career creatively. That is what happens. You need to try and realise that it's not a kind of total evaluation of your ability. It's people not responding positively to that particular idea that you have at that particular time for whatever reason.
Hello, my name's Nathan Brake. I'm the creative director of VidMedia, a creative content agency. It's my privilege to welcome you to Legacy Conversations. This channel exists to share the journeys of incredibly successful individuals, to pass on the lessons that they've learned, the mindsets that they've adopted, and the disciplines that they've developed in order to get to where they are today. My hope is that in sharing these journeys, we can learn from them and apply these same principles to our own growth in order to quicken it, so that we too can create lasting legacies. This week I'm speaking with Neil Forsyth. Neil is an award-winning television writer, author and journalist. He is such a wealth of knowledge and talks about the step-by-step journey that he's been on. What stood out to me in Neil's interview is the resilience in not giving up on what you're passionate about. Enjoy. So Neil, thank you so much for your time joining me today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to hear lots from you. Let's start off by kind of sharing your experience of what it was like growing up in Dundee.
Well, I grew up in Broughty Ferry, which in my memory always had weather like this, but I don't think that was the reality. But yeah, it was a sort of brilliant childhood, quite idyllic really, if you think about it now. Very safe and sort of loving and secure, and pals and playing football and playing tennis and cycling about. I had a lot of family around. My granny and granddad were sort of round one corner, and my great aunt and uncle round another. So it was great, sort of very community based, I suppose.
Brilliant. And kind of thinking retrospectively, Dundee at that time when you grew up, with like lack of internet and things, did you ever think having living in that kind of creative world that you now do, did you ever think that was kind of a possibility?
No, not really. I mean, it's hard, I think, creatively, I think it's hard to envisage it as a career when you're young, generically, really. But I think particularly growing up in the kind of 1980s, 1990s in a provincial city, pre-internet, I always think that pre-internet these things felt far more distant and impossible. You know, the idea of being a writer, and it felt just unlikely. These were things that people did from other worlds, if you like. There was sort of little windows, I always thought. So Groucho's record shop, I used to go to a lot, and they, you know, kind of going to see bands, getting tickets there and buying the music. It felt like, and Broughty Ferry Library as well with the books. There was these places I would go where you'd get that sort of creative window into another world, I suppose. And then I used to read the Dundee Courier every day, and I always remember reading the Courier. When you read about people from Dundee that were doing things creatively, I always thought that was a little kind of glimmer that maybe you could achieve something in those worlds.
Wow, so was that world already quite attractive to you, that kind of creative aspect as a young boy?
Yeah, I was always English was always my best subjects at school. I was always read a lot. My granddad had a big library of books that my parents had, and I was always a big reader. And yeah, I found particularly books really when I was younger, TV as well, but books was something that I could kind of lose myself in, I suppose.
Brilliant. And did others see that kind of gift of writing in you and encourage you in that?
Yeah, definitely. At school, English had some great English teachers, and particularly there was a guy called Tom Ferry who came when I was kind of, I think, doing my hires, and he was very encouraging, and he would tell me authors to read that were out with the curriculum and things like that. So and with history as well, I like my history teachers. They were good because, you know, that was, again, it was writing and imagination. They were the subjects that I enjoyed the most. And I've wanted to do two things in my life, which was play for Dundee United or be a writer. That's the only two ambitions I've ever had. And I think at 46, it looks like I probably should concentrate on the writing.
Wow, that's brilliant. Very cool. And as a young boy, was there ever like a book that you read or a film, TV show that you watched and you kind of were drawn to and felt, if I could do something like that?
Yeah, well, writing, I loved Roddy Doyle's books. He was a great Irish author when I was younger, and a lot of authors, Martin Amis, people like that, James Kelman as well, and lots of a lot of Scottish, maybe Celtic authors. Maybe I kind of gravitated to television. I used to love watching American TV when I was young. I found it so exciting, like impossibly exotic, to be watching Roseanne or sort of Cheers, that kind of thing. So I was always very interested in the kind of Hollywood of it. But in terms of TV, Cracker was a massive influence on me. Jimmy McGovern's show about Robbie Coltrane played a kind of police shrink, if you like. And that was, I remember watching that and thinking, that was kind of becoming very aware that God, someone's written it, all these amazing moments within the show. And so I remember thinking about the writing of it a lot more after watching that.
Oh, very cool. So after school, what was the decision that you made?
So what I should have done is do English literature, but again, it was that kind of confidence thing, I suppose. It's quite hard to generate that of saying, and I think for asking a 17-year-old essentially to say, I'm going to be a writer, that's what I'm going to do, that's how I'm going to make money and survive and everything else, it's kind of impossibly arrogant, so I just couldn't quite get the confidence to kind of say that's exactly what I want to do and put all my eggs in that basket, I suppose, and take what is essentially a big gamble. So I did a sort of more generic degree, went to university in Edinburgh, and again, I wish I'd pursued other aspects even when I was at university. I remember there was a student newspaper, for example, and I just thought, why didn't I just couldn't bring myself to kind of go along and go to the meetings and say, oh, maybe this is something I can do, even though I probably thought I had the ability to do it. But I think that's, coming from Dundee, even when I was young, even Edinburgh and Glasgow were quite intimidating places to go. And I remember going to Edinburgh University and it was full of these very confident people. There's a lot of English students there, and and I just look at these people and I couldn't quite kind of get my head around where they got their confidence from, and I kind of shrunk away a little bit. So I think it's very hard to, ability, when you're young, ability is a great thing to have, but getting that confidence in yourself that you can maybe do these things I think it takes a long time to come.
Was that something that you then, in recognising that, is that something you purposely kind of worked on in yourself?
A little bit, but it's hard as well because a creative career is littered with rejection. I mean it's an absolutely integral part of the career, and I think that can be very hard. I mean, I always remember when I was working in an office job when I was trying to get out of in my early 20s, I wrote a bit of a novel and sent it off I bought the writer's yearbook and sent it off to all these literary agents, and I still remember getting these endless letters of rejection, and it's hard, it's hard to then think, oh well, no, but I think I can maybe do this, but you just need, it's like any career, you just need a few people to believe in you, or one early on to believe in you, and then try and get that first bit of achievement and cling on to it. But also you need to recognise rejection as part of the career creatively. That is what happens. I get show ideas rejected now, and that's just what happens. It's part of it, and you need to try and realise that it's not a kind of total evaluation of your ability. It's people not responding positively to that particular idea that you have at that particular time for whatever reason, and realise that there's a greater battle to be won by just by continuing to develop creatively, and these rejections might get rarer and rarer, which is kind of what happens.
Well, that's very good advice. Was there ever a point that you felt, that's it, I'm done?
I've definitely had sort of lows. I mean, I think the problem is that you think the first time you achieve something creatively or something concrete happens, you think this is it, this is the springboard to success. I remember when I wrote my first book, so I was, I worked my way. It's kind of levels of audacity for me. Like when I was working an office job, and I think, well, maybe I could get some work just doing work for football websites. So that achieved that, and then maybe I could get some newspaper work, like do match reports. So that was the next thing I did. So I did football match reports, and and then they let me do a couple of interviews, and then I started working for magazines, and then from magazines I found this really interesting story, and I thought, well, maybe that could be a book, and that became my first book deal, and then from books to telly. So it was sort of levels of audacity, and if I'd thought at the beginning, maybe I'll go and write sort of a big television drama, so there's no way I could get my head around that, but I could find those little steps that I could sort of achieve, that I felt I had the ability for, and maybe the contacts for, and work my way through it. I always wanted to try and get all the way to TV, but I started with that. But I was digressing. My first book was about Elliot Castro. There's a story, a really interesting story about a Scottish credit card fraudster. And at the time, in the early noughties, there was an American author called Ben Mesrich who was writing these big non-fiction books, sort of crimey American books, quite kind of well-written, sort of pacey reads, which is what I kind of wanted to do at the time. And I thought, and I remember reading this interview with this guy, and a lot of his books are made into films. And he had, in the interview, I remember they said he had this huge penthouse apartment looking over Boston Harbour. And in the interview, they talked about Mesrich showing the interviewer this telescope he had. And I always remember it said it was a NASA level telescope and things. So anyway, I was reading all this thinking, oh, this is what's going to happen to me, you know, when I do my first book, I'm gonna end up living in a penthouse with a massive telescope. And then my book came out, and you know, I think it went well, but I was lucky to get a pair of binoculars out. You know, that was the reality. But you kind of think, particularly when you're younger, you have to get your head around the idea that everything you do is going to be this huge material success, if you like. It might actually be what is almost more important, a level of creative achievement that will take you to the next stage, which you realise looking back, that's the important thing. Not having some great hit out the gate. It's doing well enough to get you to the next thing you want to do.
That's really interesting, I guess. Yeah, instead of going for the end result, it's understanding that development stage that you need to get in order to do
absolutely that. Nathan, but also that you're always at the development stage. That's the other thing that I you know, as a writer, it's great to be a good writer. It's far more important to be an improving writer. That's more important because it's about kind of trajectory and development and getting closer and closer to your kind of true voice, mastering the technical sides of writing, particularly script writing, and getting better. I think that's what you've got to realise. It's like it's all about getting better at every stage of your career, and that's what it is for me now in my career. I'm editing a show just now. I'm editing the second series of The Gold, and even in the edit of the second series of The Gold, I'm starting to recognise structural problems with script writing that I've not fully mastered and that I'm having to fix in the edit, and I'm then taking those lessons into the scripts I'm writing now for my next show, and it's endless, the development. And I think that's really important, of never thinking that you're the finished article, or never thinking that you're kind of reached the end of creative development, and now it's about just, you know, picking and choosing your projects. It's about getting better, you know, and I think that's definitely a sort of lifelong thing.
Wow, no, that's brilliant. Thank you, Neil. Interesting you mentioned about the kind of the project you're doing just now, The Gold, season 2 with. So in my limited understanding, I presume you would have written it and filmed it and edited it exactly how it was done. But it's interesting to hear that you're actually you're changing it in the edit from the script. So that's really interesting. I guess, is that kind of adaptability then another aspect of just being able to be free with changing things?
Well, it's two things. First of all, I've worked my way to a stage in my career that I have creative oversight, which I think it's rare for a writer to have in the UK. In America, it's a kind of standard thing with television, but here it's quite rare. But and I'm very comfortable in that position, but I think I've earned it with the work I've done, and I think I handle that responsibility well, hopefully. So I can do it, but also working with others, working with directors and editors, and a script editor and producers and everything else. But structure. It's structure, really. And the more I write anything, the more I realise that it's about structure and it's about storytelling. And of course, it's character and dialogue and everything else, but it's all comes down to storytelling for me. And that's what, you know, when I was a kid in school in Dundee, in the playground, trying to tell people the story and engage them and thinking about how you're going to tell it, you know, through to working for Dundee United football fanzine when I was 13, 14, writing half a page, or doing match reports for Scottish newspapers where I had 300 words to tell the story of. It's storytelling, and it's structuring that story in an engaging, interesting way. And that's what we do in the edit. It's a complicated show with lots of storylines. And you'll often sit there, and in the script it made perfect sense, but you watch it and you think, this feels very cluttered up front. I'm going to start a story later, and you're moving things around. And my office is just, the walls just all whiteboards, and I'm constantly just moving post-it notes and things like this. And it's just, it doesn't end. The storytelling part of making a television show goes all the way through until you hand it off to the channel. Because even when you're doing the dub for the sound, for example, and I might be putting a little bit of extra dialogue, ADR, to help tell a story, or with the grade, sometimes there's a kind of a thriller aspect of a scene, but you want to pick something out in the corner to help add some more tension. So the storytelling never ends, and it goes across all departments, and it's great. I find it exciting, hard work, but really rewarding.
Wow, that's totally fascinating, amazing. Thank you. So at what stage was it that you went to New York Film Academy, and what kind of was behind that decision?
So that was, this is what we're talking about earlier, I suppose, in terms of a creative career is never like that, sadly. It's kind of very choppy, and it can go either way at any moment. What had happened to me there was I'd worked as a freelance journalist, which I kind of worked my way into. I was still working in a pub in Edinburgh into my kind of late 20s, and then I think I finally made the call to go full-time, and I published my first book. And then I'd published a few books and done some good journalism work and things like this, but it was, publishing's very hard. It was, I'd had a novel out with a really kind of cool independent London publisher, and I'd had a novel out with a big publisher, and then both novels had sort of done, okay. I think they were good. I think I'd done decent books for a kind of fairly young novelist at the time, but they hadn't been huge commercial hits or anything. And it was difficult, because you do think, God, my book's coming out, it's getting launched and all that stuff, and so I'd kind of hit this slight lull, I suppose, in terms of not quite sure what I wanted to do next creatively, a bit disappointed necessarily with how the career had gone. I mean, even though looking back, I think it was brilliant that I'd written 2 novels in my late 20s, but it was kind of, I hadn't got to where I thought this was going to lead. And I went off to New York, and I was working there doing journalism and writing another book, but I was kind of also just getting a bit unsure of myself. I think it's hard, getting a bit, and probably starting to get things rejected as well in terms of book ideas and things like this. So I dealt with that not in necessarily massively productive ways. It was quite a hedonistic time in my life and everything else. And then I just read about this screenwriting course at the New York Film Academy, and I went along to it, and it was epiphanical really for me, because it was a new way of writing that I'd always wanted to do, always been very wary of. Obviously, there was no way I'd be able to master just the technical side of script writing. And it was a great tutor, and he made it very interesting and accessible, and he'd written films and everything else. And you're in New York, so you have a slight air of possibility, and it was great. It was really thrilling and interesting, and it forced me to forced me to download the script writing software and just write a page of script and work out how to do it. Even though now, frankly, I'm not very good with the software, but you wrote a script over the course, so you had to write the script, you had to think about all the technical sides of that. And I just thought, and I remember sitting in the rooms, in the New York Film Academy, and it was, beautiful day in New York, and just thinking, Christ, I think I could possibly do this. I think I can maybe do this, and it really gave me the push to have a crack at it.
Wow, it's really interesting that going from the place of being a published author to thinking I'll try something totally different. Yeah, that sounds quite brave.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you get past the technical side of it, it's not wildly different, but I think it's, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, published author, it sounds great on paper that you're a published author, but when you're doing, the Pitlochry Book Festival to 5 people, and you're related to 3 of them, it's kind of, it's not necessarily the massive boost to your confidence you think it's going to be. So, yeah, I definitely, it still felt a distant dream, but I really, really like script writing. I like two forms of writing. I love writing prose. I like writing long form journalism. I really enjoy, but pragmatically, it's a hell of a lot of work. Commercially, it's far less attractive than it even was 10 years ago, I suppose. And it's hard for me to justify spending the time on that when I've got a TV company and things. But script writing, I really, really enjoy it. It feels like a vibrant medium. I like the solitary aspect of the writing. I like that period, but then I love the fact that you're then working with people and bringing it together, and it's a team effort, and it's hard work but fun. So I think the life of a novelist is probably not for me. That kind of full-time solitude, if you like, with a little bit of publicity here and there. But also just as a medium, as a form, a script feels like a living document to me. And I enjoy that aspect to it. I hear the kind of voices as I write it, and it feels lively and something that's kind of coming to life in front of you. Whereas I found writing novels extremely difficult, frankly.
I guess, you touched on it there, that kind of aspect of it's just you in a room, I guess.
Yeah.
How do you work on kind of that self-drive, motivation to lead yourself to kind of get this done?
I pretty easily. I've got a good work ethic. I think my parents have a very good work ethic. All my family do. And I largely enjoy writing. Which I'm very lucky, I think. I speak to some writers and they talk about it in this torturous kind of terms, and I can't really get my head around that. I don't feel like that at all. My wife's my script editor, so there's there's a natural working together that I wouldn't be able to hide very well in terms of not putting the hours in over the week. But I enjoy it. I enjoy writing. I enjoy getting up in the morning and writing and creating something. And when I go to bed, something exists that didn't exist that morning. It's my favourite part of the process, writing, in terms of television. I find everything's possible at that stage. When you get to television production, it becomes far more practical conversation. There's just a lot to deal with a television production. That some of it's not massively creative. Lots of people to deal with, and just it's physically hard work producing a television show. You're always up against it because of money. You have to do long days, and there's a lot of travel and things like that. So it's physically filming a television show is one of the least interesting things you could ever witness. It's incredibly slow. You'll sometimes film for 10 hours for 2 or 3 minutes of screen time, and then that's the kind of reality of it. And then I enjoy the edit as well, and casting and rehearsals. They're all interesting in their own way. I feel very privileged to do it, but definitely that purity of the writing process, I really enjoy.
And when you're writing, can you very strongly kind of visualize seeing it? And then is it strange when you see it on those film days and you're like, oh, there's...
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it can be good and bad. Often the thing about working with talented people is they raise your work. I'll often write scenes that on paper are, there's just scenes that you just can't get around not having them in your script in terms of exposition or just moving on story in a slightly more pragmatic way. But what can be really thrilling when you get great actors in and they actually just make it interesting. They make dialogue that could be straightforward and a bit banal, potentially quite interesting and nuanced and fun or fascinating to watch. So it can be positive, but absolutely it can be, you can turn up and think, God, this feels, in my head, this was going to be something very different. And that's just often the practicality of making television or film, where it's, you can't get the right location or cost. Obviously it's all about cost as well. I've written a hell of a lot of chase scenes in my script. I've written a lot more chase scenes than have been filmed, put it that way, because the minute you get to production, it's the practicality comes in and you start looking immediately at car sequences and things like that. Wow, so much involved in it, so much juggling. I imagine
kind of in your world, there must be a lot of egos and interesting people that you meet. How do you kind of navigate kind of selling your vision of getting the kind of story and working with people who might have different perspectives?
I think you've just got to be respectful, but equally, I do believe that the creator of the television show should have that ultimate position of being able to say, look, we've listened to you're always going to hit a position with a creative process, even when it can be the most collegiate conversation in the world, where people just disagree. All very well intentioned, but they just disagree, and someone has to say, well, look, I think we're going to go with that. Now, I believe that should be the creator of the show. Now, that's quite unusual in the UK. It probably sounds quite logical, but it's just not. In America, television writers are showrunners in a very, very in-depth way, and I wouldn't personally want that job. It's like signing off budgets and signing off props. They really are the kind of complete oversight through every department. Whereas I'm probably somewhere in between the UK and the more normal UK and American model, where I'm an exec producer on the show, and I'm a kind of across it. But, I think you have to let people feel that they have considerable, rightly so, creative input. And often, if people have a very strong creative opinion and I'm unsure, then you trust them because it's great, because that's why you work with talented people. So it's not a kind of it's not a one-way street of decision making at all. But the big thing I've worked my way towards is just being able to have that position if needed. And it's surprising how rare it comes up, where people just disagree and I say, look, I'm sorry, I would like to go with this. And that is something that I think is really important. If you want to produce a truly authored piece of work, I do think the original author of it has to have a decent level of input in the eventual thing. And it just doesn't happen. A lot of writers of television are, and sometimes they're happy to. They're going to be, for whatever reason, they could be a bit more introspective, or they're happy to send off scripts and not be massively involved in the process. And or maybe it's not. Often it's not their decision, and these decisions are taken by other people involved in the chain. And I just think it's not fair, to be honest. I'm probably a little bit militant on that. I'm a member of the Writers' Union and things, and I just think that the writers should be protected, and most people do, but I do think there's cases where writers are just not given the role they should have in the production.
When you were kind of developing, was there any stage where you sought like a mentor?
Well, I've been very fortunate throughout my career to work with brilliant people that have absolutely made me better. Great producers and directors and actors. I mentioned Rhiannon, my script editor, who's a big help to me in an ongoing sense. But there's been people, Irvin Welsh and Brian Cox are two people who absolutely took an interest in me and kind of went out their way to support me. And I really appreciated that. If it wasn't for Irvin Welsh, I don't think I'd have had the career with books I've had, and which led into television. If it wasn't for Brian, I don't think I very possibly wouldn't have ever made television if it hadn't been for Brian support. So there's people along the way that have been kind of just invaluable, and often you don't realise it till years later. You think about these conversations you had, and maybe you thought of them. You were a bit more defensive when you're younger, and you realise back that people were trying to help you, and actually what they were saying was so helpful, and it went in even though you didn't appreciate it at the time. Also, I've taken a lot from bad experiences. I think that's the other thing. I've had some really unenjoyable experiences in terms of developing television shows where I just felt that the chemistry wasn't right, or the kind of decision makers, if you like, were kind of misguided, is a sort of generous way to kind of look at it. Maybe not possessors of enormous ability themselves, but and I think that. But from those experiences, I took a lot in terms of I don't want to be in that position again. How can I work my way to a level in the industry that I won't have to work with those people, or it more flagged up the kind of people I did want to work with, if you like. So I do think you can take just as much from a bad experience as a good experience in terms of things to learn from it.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really good. Really good. Thank you. I notice humor is kind of used a lot in your work. Is that something that kind of early on you noticed was, again, quite natural and you wanted to kind of develop, or how did you kind of look to include that in your work?
You know, I always enjoyed, I guess, trying to make people laugh when I was younger. I think probably quite annoyingly so, but yeah, but I always enjoyed humour and comedy, and Viz magazine I loved when I was a teenager, and I always remember my granny in Broughty Ferry. She asked me one November, what do you want for your Christmas? I said the Viz annual, but she hadn't told my parents. I remember on Christmas Day unveiling whatever it was, the great big pink stiff one or something, in front of the Christmas dinner, to my mother's horror. But I was a teenager, so Viz was a big thing. Football fanzines, I love the humour of the football fanzines. So it was interesting because I wrote 2 quite serious novels, and then I wrote these humour books, the Bob Sermon books, which then led to radio and television. So I guess I became seen as a comedy writer. But I was writing a lot of these sitcom pilot scripts, and I went to America and I got some work over there writing kind of pilot scripts, which was very exciting. But none of them were getting made. This was after Bob Servant, and I certainly hit a kind of wall where I thought, I don't really think this is actually what I want to write. I don't want to write these overt, completely comedically driven scripts. I want to write something that's sort of in between, that's got a bit of drama in it as well, like a lot of the shows I loved. And I hit a kind of nadir. There was one Boxing Day where I was writing this American sitcom pilot script. I'd gone over to Los Angeles and sold this idea to, I think it was CBS, and it was a studio sitcom. And I remember sitting there on Boxing Day, because the American system, you have to have them in January for the pilot system and things like this. And I was writing this script and I thought, I wouldn't watch this. Like, I would not watch this. This is not my kind of thing at all. But I'd ended up in this position of being seen as the person that wrote, would write in this world. And I wasn't particularly doing it successfully either. None of them were getting made. I was getting lots of script commissions. But so anyway, I sent that off, and then I took a month off that January, and I just thought about the kind of things I actually really wanted to write, and just started reading lots of books. And from that month, I wrote, I read the book by a guy called Eddie Brayman that turned out to be my first 1-hour drama I did for the BBC called Eric Ernie and Me. I wrote a couple of pictures that became these little Sky Playhouse I did, and I wrote the paragraph of the opening scene of Guilt, of series 1 of Guilt, and I didn't go back to that for like months, but I just got up one day and thought about these 2 brothers, and I wrote almost the opening scene. And that just came from kind of stepping back and thinking about what I genuinely wanted to write and the kind of stories and characters I wanted to write. And it's amazing how so much of my career came out of that month.
That's amazing. So there's almost that kind of, it seems an odd piece of advice to kind of stop. Yeah. And kind of take a pause, but actually that was incredibly valuable then for you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's right, Nathan. I think because you can kind of swept up. It's very easy to go off creatively, take a slight tangent off your kind of what you really want to do, often for very understandable reasons, needing to earn money and everything else. But that little tangent, it just extrapolates out, and you start to veer further and further away from what you'd actually be like to do, and you suddenly sit there thinking, this is not, and that's what happened to me, is sitting there thinking, this is not what I want to be doing at all. And it was about kind of just stopping for a while. But you're not really stopping, because then, if you're not physically writing, you're thinking, and that's almost more important. So yeah, that was a really important step, and that led me to writing drama, and I think the kind of drama that I now write, and that's very much what I enjoy.
Wow. That's a really cool kind of journey. Thank you. Something that amazes me about what you do is understand, I don't know if it's like the psychology or like personality of multiple different people. How is it as a writer that you can understand someone of that personality who has lived that life, this is how they would react in that situation, versus someone else in the same situation, but because of their personality, their psychology, their life would respond differently? Like, that fascinates me, how you can even comprehend outside of your own self and put it in someone else's?
I think you have to be curious about the world. I think that's really important as a writer. You need to have met a lot of people, observed a lot of people, gone, had adventures, and I think that, be open to the world and interested in people, which I think I've always been. So you kind of, without realising it really, you've stored up a lot of experiences and a lot of people you've met, people with different outlooks, if you like, and feel like you have some depth of understanding of how they would see the world. And then you've got to understand your characters. I mean, you don't have to like your characters at all. You can actively dislike them. You don't have to agree with them, you don't have to connect with them in any visceral way other than understanding them. You need to understand your characters, and if you understand them, then they will be consistent narratively, which helps the viewer and helps the reader, helps you. They will have a clear outlook on life. That you will have an inherent vision on how they would react to each situation, and that's very, very helpful because it helps you with story. So by the time, with Max and Jake and Guilt, for example, I felt I understood those characters so well that certainly when I was in the second and third series, they help you with story because you're writing a scene, something happens, you know how they're going to react. Their reaction to that event pushes them into the next stage of the story. So it can be a propulsive element to the writing when you feel you've got a real grip on your characters. But also, you need your characters to have conflict between them, and so they need to have differing and contrasting and conflicting views on things. So that forces you to develop very clear visions for each of them, if you like. And also, I'm very strict with storytelling, and I think I honestly think this comes back to when I wrote football match reports. I always think about when I was given 300 words to tell a story of a football game. Every word of those 300 needs to count. There's no wastage, and who really made an impact on the match? Who should you pick out? And I do think that that kind of strictness and militancy helps a lot when you try to tell a television show with multiple characters, because the first thing I think of, right, do I need all these characters? Are some of them doing the same job? And that's the big thing. And then you composite them, or you get rid of one of them, and you boil it down until you've got a cast you feel you really need. And by doing that process, that cast will all have very different roles to play in the story, and in doing so they will be very different people. So that's another way that you can make sure you're diluting your cast list until you have the people you really need, and they're all very clearly defined.
That is amazing. Wow, very cool. I love that. And have you ever received kind of feedback that's changed the course of what you were doing, or made you see it in a whole different way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, loads of little things. I've got a kind of, I used to write these things down in a notebook somewhere where I read interesting things people said in interviews. But, little things people say sometimes as a throwaway comment. I remember when I made Bob Servant, the first series, it was a great director, Annie Griffin, and there was a scene with various characters, and there was a character in there, a female character, who was only in one or two scenes, and she said, "Oh, what's she doing here? What does she?" And I didn't really understand the question, so I said, "Well, she's got a couple of lines," and he said, "No, but what's that character? Or why is she here in this scene?" And I didn't actually have an answer, which I thought was kind of acceptable, and she made very clear it wasn't, and that she said, "You need to know why every character's in the scene, even if they're not voicing that motivation." Just to have a grasp on what's going on at every level. And that was really interesting, and I really took that on board, thinking about every single character and thinking about their motivation, why they're there. Because often the answer to that is, well, they don't have to be there, and then you take them out of the scene. I think a lot of the time when you start off writing television, you're writing scenes with 5 people in it, and then it only needs to be 2, that kind of thing. So that was very helpful. Brian, I remember saying to me, Brian Cox, that with drama that has humour in it, he always says, you only need one joke in a scene. You only need one joke in a scene. And by joke, he was it's a sort of reductive term of one comedic moment. And I think that's really true as well. Like if you want something to be driven dramatically, you can't overload it with humour. And one of the big things I do when I write my scripts now, which are dramas that have humour within them, as I'm editing them, one of the biggest things I'm doing is just trimming out funnier moments, trimming them out until you have just ones that you feel are so deserved and they stand out more as a result. You know, they're more pleasing to the audience because it surprises them. And so, yeah, but that's two examples from, you know, 100. You know, one of the great things of making TV is you're around creative people a lot of the time. So you're in downtime, you're chatting to the actors and the directors, and anyone can give you ideas in a production or listening to their experiences. So yeah, constantly learning. It's and kind of just soaking it up, I suppose.
Oh, that's brilliant. And you mentioned about kind of on the film shoots and dealing with budgets and cast and long shoot days. Within all these kind of challenges, how do you kind of manage that and make sure that the project is kind of moving forward and hitting those goals?
Well, luckily, it's a lot of that's not my job, and I've got very talented people that do it. Oh, you know, great producers and production managers and things like that. But I'm across it, obviously, because it affects script. So yeah, the budget's just a constant battle. It's just a constant battle because it's a moving target with television production. You never really know what's going to go wrong that week or what's going to come in wildly more expensive than you thought or cheaper. So it's a real talent, the people that do that. Do that job, and they're very good at it. It's really interesting watching them work. And where it affects me is, okay, we've hit a problem now, and I need to look at what's left to shoot and find the obviously more expensive things, and maybe find more pragmatic ways to do that. Which it can be very frustrating, but equally sometimes it forces you to do something that's more interesting than just chucking money at the screen. You do something that's kind of a bit more intense and character-led, and ultimately it's a better scene as a result. Eric Ernie is a good example where that was the story of Morecambe and Wise from the position of their writer Eddie Braben, and I'd written it. It was going to be on BBC One, so I'd written a version of it where we recreated a lot of the big Morecambe and Wise sketches, and it was going to be very expensive. And then very late on, BBC didn't have the money to make it for BBC One, and they kind of shunted us to BBC Four. And the budget probably halved, it certainly dropped by a big old chunk. And initially there was a sort of panic that, is this actually even doable now? And what I did was I went away and wrote a pared down version of the story where we didn't see any of the big numbers. We didn't recreate any of the sketches. And it was all about dressing rooms and corridors and backstage snatched moments and rehearsal. And it was just so much better as a result, because that's interesting, you know. And when you look back, what's the point in recreating something that was made for television, you know, and everyone's sitting with their iPads trying to make sure everyone's in the right position. You know, you're not doing anything new. So, you know, that's a great example of what looked like a kind of catastrophic budget situation turning creatively, making it, you know, much better, I think, the end result.
That's brilliant. I have heard the phrase creativity comes from limitations, and that kind of rings true, I guess, in that scenario.
Yeah, definitely.
Really cool. I've also heard that kind of people much prefer the book versions when the films come out. They say, "Oh, the book's much better." I'd love your kind of perspective of it as someone who's essentially sat in both camps, as an author of novels and a screenwriter. How do you kind of approach that argument that books are better than films?
I just think they're different things. I mean, it's I think the experience of reading a book is very different to certainly going to the cinema, for example. And there's a level of immersion you get from a novel that you're never going to get from a visual medium, I don't think. But storytelling-wise, it's interesting. Novels are so much about character. You know, I get sent books sometimes to potentially adapt, and you can read the best novel ever, the most, you know, incredible escapist, immersive experience, and fantastically realised character and world, and beautifully researched, and it takes you away to this very distant place. In terms of adapting a film, you think, well, you know, it's 300 pages and two things happen. I mean, that's the case with novels a lot of the times. Very little actual nuts and bolts of the story, which is not a failure, because that's not what they've set out to do. But I think with the visual medium, you know, certainly in terms of what I write anyway, I need story. I just need to be able to lean on story in terms of dramatic structure. I need things to happen at a regular basis as I tell the story, and I think not a lot of novels don't don't have that, and again, it's not a criticism because it's not what they're trying to do, and it's not what their strengths are. So I think they're very different experiences for the reader and the viewer. I think they're very different artistic targets that people have as they sit down to do it. So I think it's quite hard to compare. In terms of comparing an original to an adaptation, well, adaptation is a distillation. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. And I think, if you take a true story or a very detailed non-fiction book and put that particularly into a film, you're trying to take that into 90 to 100 minutes. It's distillation, and it's just a very different thing. It becomes narratively superficial, I guess, in terms of the small share of the original that you're taking. But I do a lot of true story stuff now, and it's one of the things that you've really got to do is work out how to pick the story out of something much bigger, and take this huge research document and think, right, what's the streamlined story within that? What do I need from this? And it's as much about what you leave out as what you put in. And often you're leaving out stuff that's great, but it just doesn't work in terms of the wider world that I want to tell in the television show. The Gold being a good example. And there's little storylines within the Brinks-Mat story and the Gold that are fantastic, but they don't help me in terms of the television story I'm telling, so I couldn't put them in. So it's kind of self-editing, I suppose.
That sounds like a very hard discipline to learn, to be able to just take bits that are very good and say, not for this. Yeah,
and you've got to. And then often that happens at different stages of it. There's when I'm at the script stage, there'll be things I've put in the outline that I'm writing and say, I can't wait to write that. And then I get to the script and I write it and I think, well, this just doesn't really fit. And God, you just have to cut it. And then the next time that happens is in the edit, stuff that you've filmed. And it's really hard sometimes because you're cutting actors from their work. But you just have to cut sections of it because you think it just doesn't help us with the overall story, or the scripts, it's running long in terms of the cut. So it never ends, that kind of cutting and editing. It can be quite thrilling in a way, to be honest, to cut stuff, because you're like, oh, something's not right, and then you just wake up and you think, God, I could just cut all of that stuff, and it's quite kind of daunting. But then you do it and you think it's just better. It's just what's better in the end.
Wow, it's such a fascinating process. Very cool. How do you kind of get inspiration? Because obviously there's things that you've done that are based on true events, and then things that aren't. So how do you get inspiration and think, I'm going to create something?
I think it's quite simple, really. Are you excited by it? That's the thing. It's are you excited by this story? Do you want to tell it? Then have a go at telling it. And I think it sounds simplistic, but it's not necessarily, because there's been times in my career where I've taken on projects for other reasons. Sometimes just I needed to earn cash, and then I've got into it and I've kind of lost my own motivation, and I'm writing scripts I'm not massively interested in. It's more about like, let's just get this draft done, and then I'm free of the process and things. So I need to feel really excited about it, because it's so much work that you need to start from a position of excitement. So it's kind of instinct, really. I'll read stories where I think, well, that could be a TV show, but I personally don't find it that interesting. So I kind of stop myself going ahead with it just for commercial reasons, and wait to find something that I find more kind of tied to it, I suppose. I feel like kind of a slight proximity to the story in terms of my own experiences, or people I've known, or worlds that I've always been interested in. Something that makes me really think, well, I think I'm the writer that should write that particular take on that particular story.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you. And what would you kind of say to someone who's wanting to do what you do? What advice would you pass on to them?
Just write. I'd say write. By writing you get better at it, and it is a muscle, and you need to develop it. And enjoy the writing. Write something that you enjoy. Write something that you're excited about, because then at the end of that process you'll have either a short story or a book or a script that you really like and you're proud of. That's the most important thing. Anything that might come of it is just a bonus, and you recognise that might be very difficult, but write something that's given you need to enjoy the act of the writing, because everything else is a bonus and can be a very distant dream, really. So that would be the big thing. In terms of the practicality of writing, the big thing I always say and that I do is know what you're going to write tomorrow. So at the end of each day, I write myself a little note about what I want to do first the next day, and that's just really helpful, because then I don't have that kind of tyranny of the blank page. I wake up the next day, I'm half asleep, I don't have to worry about anything, I just need to read that little note and write that thing, and then I'm off and running. So kind of trying to help that propulsion and that kind of forward momentum, I suppose.
That is amazing. That is very good. Thank you. And is there anything that you've done that you would say that you're kind of A, not happy with, but B, kind of very proud of?
Oh, I mean, I've not made anything that I can't watch with some level of discomfort, because I would do it because I'd have done it differently as an overall experience. But again, as you get more experience, you recognise that you shouldn't be aiming for perfection. You should be aiming for just trying to make as few flaws as possible, I suppose. And more importantly, don't keep making the same mistakes. Progress and learn from them. But always a lot of room for improvement. But lots that I'm proud of as well. Equally, I don't think I've ever made anything that I don't look at with elements of pride or great memories, really, of seeing the people I work with and think, God, that was so much fun. But there's certainly scenes that where I feel I got in a kind of groove, and I think also with television, it's about everything coming together. It's not, you need everything to come together to make a scene really sort of sing, if you like. It's the script, it's the performances, the direction, the shooting of it, the costume, the makeup, everything needs to come together. And on the rare occasions it does, in my opinion, subjectively, it's brilliant. It can be really, really kind of magical to watch.
Very cool. And when you're kind of doing a project, do you start it and complete it and then go on to the next, or do you find you're juggling multiple at the same time, and is there an ideal that you would recommend as the best?
It's a very good question. It's a very pertinent question, because I'm determined to be someone that stops it and starts a new project, whereas what I've really done in reality the last 5 or 6 years is overlapped. And it's brutal. I mean, it's amazing. I feel very, very privileged, but the actual workload that I've taken on is kind of insane. And where I've been filming a show while writing the next show, and I've done that back to back now for about 5 or 6 years. And it's the reality of that is working at weekends and evenings, and I was often I'm filming, and they turn round, so you've got maybe 10 minutes while they move camera angles, and I'm in the corner trying to write a scene on my next script and things. So it's I would never moan about it. I worked for a long, long time to be in this position, but it is not sustainable. And I've got to the position now, thankfully, in my career where I'm going just a bit firmer about schedules and things, and trying to push these things apart. So I'm a bit more monomaniacal, where I'll do one project, see it through, start another, and life will be easier as a result. And partly that's getting older and not being so. I was so incredibly ambitious when I was younger and desperate to try and achieve something creatively, and you just don't want to say no to any kind of opportunity. And you think, well, if I write this show this year, then I'll squeeze it all forward. I'll bring everything forward a year and things like that. Whereas now, I've much more about kind of quality, not quantity. I'd rather make less shows for the rest of my career, but make better shows and have a more manageable life, I suppose, while doing so.
Oh, very good, thank you. And you've obviously been very successful. How do you kind of set goals to be like, what's next, what's better, what's greater? What keeps you excited for the future? Just
finding another story I want to write. It's as simple as that, really. And thinking, God, that's something in that, and then researching it and getting excited. So just being excited about writing, just like I was when I was 13, working for the Dundee United fanzines, where I was, I'd have an idea and I'd write it and send it off, and then it'd be in the fanzine, and just finding something I want to write. That's what it's kind of all about, and it's a very, very, very lucky and fortunate position to be in, that I do something that I love, which is great.
Amazing. And does the kind of forward pushing of technology and kind of what they do within visual effects and cinematography and things, does that affect kind of the story aspect or inspire you in your writing in new ways that you couldn't have done maybe 10 years ago?
There's certain aspects of making television, like drones have made a huge difference. For example, you'd have to do a helicopter shot which costs tens of thousands of pounds, and now you've got a bloke that comes along and sends a drone up and you get these amazing shots. So the technology, you would definitely, areas of it you would embrace. Everyone's worried about AI with writing. I don't know, I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think for now technology feels to be an overall benefit definitely for television, just in terms of bringing down costs.
Brilliant, brilliant. And if you could choose one highlight moment in your career so far, what sticks out to you?
When we were filming Guilt, I think the first series, there was a scene at the top of Carlton Hill in Edinburgh that we were filming sort of towards the end of the day. And I was up there and it was sun setting, it was Mark and Jamie, nice scene, and they're performing it very well. But I had a real moment where I could see the flat in Leith, because I lived in Edinburgh for a long time. Being from Dundee, I then went to Edinburgh after university for a good few years, and I could see the flat that I lived in Leith. I could see the routes I used to take through Edinburgh to work in the pub that I worked in. And to be on top of the hill making a BBC drama, it just felt impossible. It just felt incredible, you know. And I've had lots of moments like that in my career where I kind of, every show I make, there's a moment, usually in the first day or two of filming, where I think, God, I can't believe this has happened to me. And yeah, you do feel very fortunate, definitely.
That's amazing. Very cool. And finally, Neil, what would you like your legacy to be?
For what little legacy I will have, I'd hope it, you know, it's nice to think that these things exist. It's nice to think that books and television shows exist. And obviously I'm talking about creative legacy. Family's more important, but in terms of creative legacy, it's lovely that these things will exist, and people, probably not many, but people will in the future maybe discover them and enjoy them. And it's nice to think that there's a continuation of the work.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on Legacy Conversations. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it beneficial. I'm looking forward to the next one.